Well, hello, hello. Good morning. Happy election doomsday, everybody. It's finally here. You're watching the Ted Manila Info Show, of course. TMI for short. I am Manila Chan. That right there is Ted Rawl. We talk about everything, news, politics, lifestyle, culture, fad diets, whatever, the occult sometimes, anything and everything goes.
We haven't really done the occult, actually.
We touched on it.
False advertising. Yeah, but we should really. Oh, that's true. We did do that. That's true.
We did. We talked about like haunted DC, which I totally believe.
That's true. We should do more occult.
We talk about that stuff because we believe you can never have too much information. Even if YouTube tells us we can't tell you, then you got to go to Rumble where we can tell you. If you're looking for a straight-laced, button-down news program, this show is probably not for you. You might want to turn the volume down if you're at work. Just saying. It's all the stuff you want to hear about, and then some stuff you didn't even know that you needed to hear about. So we'll have a few laughs along the way. We are live Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. Eastern. So be sure to like and follow this show and subscribe, because this is our thing. We're going for it. And this is completely viewer and subscriber sponsored. I guess we can call it that, right, Ted? Is that a fair way to put it?
It is. Yeah, I mean, like it's different models of monetization on every platform. It's pretty confusing. We had to give ourselves a bit of an education. We're still trying to figure it out. But yeah, basically, if nothing else, you just do the free subscription on YouTube and Rumble. Also, if you're active on social media, please pump out put out the word youtube.com/the TMI show, all one word, the TMI show. And I forget what the Rumble feed is. We can figure that out and get that to you.
YouTube is TM Info Show.
Yeah, that's right. So, but it'll come up if you just search for the TMI show with no spaces. And anyway, just please put the word out on your social. We need as many followers as we can, as quickly as possible, in order to make this work, in order to attract more followers.
Yeah, and later it'll, I guess, YouTube or however they do it, their algorithms will just put commercials on there, and eventually maybe we'll start making money that way. So if you cannot, if you're not in a position to sponsor the show and subscribe that way, then at least help us by spreading.
We have no ethics at all. If you're like an arms dealer, totally, we'll run your ad, no problem.
Oh,
big tobacco.
Oh my God, yes.
Yeah, vaping. I mean, vaping for
sure. For sure, obviously. So, yeah. All right. With that, let's get into the headlines. Cue the Jaws.
Manila, you're a little bit. You kind of froze up there for a minute. I don't know if that was you or if that was me. Anyway.
Yeah, I don't know, but I think we're okay now. So
cool. Yeah. All right. Cool.
Yeah, I think we're good. We're good for the headlines. Take it away.
Okay, all right. The headlines are a little bit long-winded, so I'm going to read a little faster than usual. Ukrainian officials said their troops have fired upon North Koreans in the Kursk region. That's the area that that's the part of Russia that Ukraine actually invaded. The Ukrainians have been trying to muddy up the waters by claiming that somehow North Koreans are now fighting in Ukraine. That is not true. That is not alleged to be true. There is no indication of that because it's not true. They are how North Korea and Russia have a mutual defense pact. North Koreans may be inside Russia, in which case they are fighting allegedly alongside Russian forces to kick the Ukrainians out of the Kursk region of Russia. This is the first known or alleged contact between the two sides. So far, the action has been confined completely to Russian territory. Not that Pyongyang has admitted that it has deployed any soldiers whatsoever. Question is, what happens if the Korean People's Army goes into Ukraine proper? The U.S. does not want this to happen, according to Ian Bremmer. He's the president of G0 and the Eurasia Group. The U.S. sees North Korean combat troops entering Ukraine as opposed to Kursk as a major escalation in the war and has warned Russia that such a decision would risk NATO troops being sent into Ukraine. Bremer said after discussions with senior Biden officials, the National Security Administration and NATO did not respond to any requests for comment. There are reasons for skepticism. Ukraine is not a member of NATO and has expressed frustration with its allies over how fear of escalation in Western capitals has clipped its military's wings and resulted in preventable civilian and military deaths. How seriously Russian President Vladimir Putin takes all of this depends heavily on the results of the election, which is, of course, today, as a second Trump administration would presumably be a little friendlier to Russian interests. I'm not sure that's exactly the way I would put it. I think a second Trump administration would have more interest, Manila, in trying to end the war. That
Right.
seems to be something that, so far what's happened is that Russia and Ukraine have almost had talks several times, but that the U.S. has told President Zelensky of Ukraine not to engage in any discussions with Russia at all because they want the
Right.
war to keep going. And so if Trump comes to power, he would presumably do what he's sort of done in the past in his first term, and what he's signaled that he would do this time, which is to try to sit the two sides down, something that probably the Ukrainians are ready to do at this point because they are losing on the battlefield, and they would probably we would probably end up with a final solution that looks a lot like what Russia wanted starting back in 2022, which is basically the Donbass, which is ethnic Russian, and to keep Crimea, and for Ukraine to agree not to join NATO, and for Ukraine and Russia to declare that they no longer view each other as enemies or adversaries. Seems reasonable to me. I mean, the border between Ukraine and Russia never made sense during the Soviet period, but it didn't matter because they were part of the same country. Now that they're not, it doesn't make any sense to have all these Russians on the wrong side of the border. So these borders probably needed to be redrawn. And unfortunately, cynically, I have to say, borders often get redrawn by wars. And this would be just another example of that. All right, let's move on.
Agree. I think
All right,
Ukraine will
handicapping the
become a rump state,
Go ahead.
Ted. I will say, as Mark Sloboda, our buddy, says,
like Yugoslavia,
Ukraine is going to wind up being a rump state, and it's going to be forced into neutrality, whether or not this guy likes it. It's going to be forced into neutrality, and it's going to be a lot smaller of a region. And I think there's a lot of hoopla around the North Koreans being in Russia proper, because Kursk is Russia proper, and because of that mutual defense pact that North Korea has with Russia, they have every right to be there. It's the Ukrainians that brought the war inside the borders of Russia. And, whatever fallout comes of this, if the North Korean troops kill a bunch of Ukrainian troops, well, I mean, you're within the borders of Russia, and that's all fair play. I do not believe that they will make, the North Koreans, that is, will make an incursion into Ukraine proper, because I don't think there's any appetite on either side for this to expand and make it even hairier than it is.
I agree with that. I don't think there's. I think everybody's looking for a landing here, and the election results are important. I mean, if Harris wins, however, I would look for this to continue to drag on into.
It'll drone on.
Yeah,
for sure.
Okay, so let's keep it moving here. Let's look at the state of the election in the U.S. Senate. Currently, Democrats hold a 51-49 majority, but they're facing an almost certain loss in the seat currently held by Joe Manchin in West Virginia. That means that Republicans only need to capture one more race to win the majority, and that seems extremely likely. Meanwhile, Democrats are relying on dramatically outperforming in the polls or performing miracles and expanding their map by winning states like Texas or Florida. 34 seats are currently up for grabs. People always forget Senate terms are 6 years. And so basically there's 100 seats in the Senate. And so we do a third of them every 2 years. That's how that works. 10 races are expected to determine the balance of power. Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Arizona, Nevada, Montana. Interesting race in Montana. Nebraska, Maryland, and Texas. Arizona is a race of political extremes. Independent Senator Kirsten Sinema former Democrat, is stepping down, and Progressive Representative Ruben Gallego and Trump darling Carrie Lake, the former TV lady, are vying to take her spot. Lake, who lost the governor's race in 2022 and continues to say that she had actually won, has been encroaching on Gallego's lead in the polls in recent days. Gallego's slight edge is being attributed to his popularity among Latinos, who make up 25% of Arizonans. Michigan, meanwhile, is a competition between centrists. Democratic Senator Debbie Stabenow is retiring, and mainstream Republican Mike Rogers, a former Trump critic who has since come to embrace him, is now facing outgoing Representative Alyssa Slotkin, who's using her national security background to try to get centrists in and around Detroit. This race has been tied in the final weeks of the season, and some of the biggest issues are reproductive rights and the candidate's support for e-vehicles, a hot topic, of course, for the big three auto manufacturers that are all based there. In Ohio, my home state, Senator Sherrod Brown, Democratic incumbent who's managed to hold on as the state has turned red, is fighting to keep his seat against Trump-backed Bernie Moreno. Brown has lost what was once a commanding lead in recent weeks, is now polling behind Moreno by just a single digit. The race has drawn $500 million in ad spending. That's crazy. More than any other Senate race in history.
Nuts.
Control of the Senate could very well hinge on the Buckeye State, which has voted twice for Donald Trump and is likely to do so again today. Brown has held on to power in the past by focusing on local issues and evading questions about national politics, but he suffered from attack ads that show him as being far left on transgender issues. Democrats have to win Ohio if they plan to win their majority in the U.S. Senate. I have to say, I have a lot of sympathy for Sherrod Brown. I think he's a canny politician who has really managed to represent his state well under trying circumstances, which is why many Republican voters who support Trump also have voted for him in the past. But I expect he's going to lose that seat today.
Really? I mean, he's been there forever. And look, I've engaged with him a few times when he used to be good friends with Ed Schultz. So I'm not saying I'm his friend, but I've engaged with him multiple times, and he's a very likable, down-to-earth guy, which makes sense. Which makes sense that he represent. He's like
Ohio's Bernie. He's like tousled and like very warm.
Yeah, he's very warm and very friendly. I can't help but say a part of me actually roots for him just because I have engaged with him, and he has, warmed up to me, or I've warmed up to him, and he just, I kind of like him as a person, but his politics, the Buckeye State has really, like the headline said, has really stayed to the right, and it's always shocked me that Sherrod Brown has hung on for as long as he has, and I just wonder now that he's much older, as you can see here, I wonder if his time has come, and it's time for new blood, I think.
Look, I can argue this either way. Obviously, that's a tight race where there's only it's basically a tie there. So he could pull it out. The pros for him are that Moreno is not a very appealing candidate. And Brown is, he has good ties to organized labor in Ohio.
Right.
That's an important thing. That in a place where people are really still, and I'm one of them, furious about NAFTA. And so he's on the right side of that issue, and trade policy. I mean, it's not like you could see him cooperating with Trump on issues like tariffs against China, for example. So that kind of thing could save him. What might cost him is just like the sense generally, he's long in the tooth. He's been there a long time. Maybe it's his time to see him, and maybe we're just going to vote R down the Ohio. So we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens there. In the House of Representatives, again, things are expected to be very close. Of course, in the House, it's a 2-year term, and people run every 2 years. So all 435 seats are on the line, and likely
they're only working like 6 months, Ted. That's really, they get elected, they work for about 6 months, and then they go back to campaign for the next 18 months.
And that is kind of a feature as well as a bug. The feature, the bug part is I don't have to get into, but the feature part is it does force them to go back to their districts and try to keep the finger pulse of like what their constituents are looking for. Anyway, whichever party wins control will probably just win the House by a few seats. Republicans are currently on the defense there, where the Republicans currently control the House. They're trying to keep a slim majority. Democrats would like to gain 4 seats in order to flip the chamber. Democrats' lead, however, has declined as the election's gotten closer. Currently, Democrats are 0.5% of the Republicans, down from 2.6 back in September. The 19th district in New York is one of the most expensive House races in the 2024 election. Democrats see that as absolutely key. Republican incumbent Mark Molinaro faces a rematch against Democrat Josh Riley in the swing district that stretches across all or parts of the 11 upstate counties. It's one of those seriously gerrymandered districts. It's expected to be a bellwether for how the parties are performing in the suburbs of New York City and New Jersey, where Democrats saw disappointing turnout in the 2022 midterms, which caused them to lose that seat. Molinaro, once known as a bipartisan member of Congress, is now running as a right-winger, with his campaign drawing on fears about immigration and crime. Riley has focused on abortion and reproductive rights. That'll be a very interesting race to watch because it's kind of a microcosm for the general issues in the national election. Virginia's 7th district is worth watching because it's going to be an early bellwether of how parties are going. I mean, Virginia is almost certainly going to go for Trump as a state, but they're going to be looking at certain districts. Yeah, it looks like that. Sorry, I mean, probably go for Harris as a state. But
yeah, it'll go for Harris for sure.
But they're going to be looking at certain districts, right? Republican Derek Jansen is currently down 4 against Democrat Yevgeny Eugene Vindman, who led the whistleblower account of the quid pro quo phone call between Trump and Zelensky that became the basis of the first impeachment case against Trump.
That guy is a slime
In
ball.
Nebraska, number 2 incumbent Republican Brad Ashford is currently defeating Democrat Tony Vargas by 2 points. That's also a very tight margin. It's the same margin that the GOP won by in 2022. Democrats have been wanting to get it back ever since. The district is one of 16 Republican seats in places that voted for Biden in 2020. It's also known as the blue dot because it often sends one of Nebraska's electoral votes to the Democrats, even as the rest of the state's votes go to the Republicans. House, I think, clearly that it's clearly not clear, right? I mean, that could go either way.
You think so? I think Republicans will eke it out and hang on to their present tiny, slim margin in the House.
Well, that'll be interesting because, I mean, the House is important to the president because that's where investigations begin, right? So if a Harris administration is going to be harried by annoying House members like, James Comey of the House Oversight Committee, who are going to start, drowning the new White House with subpoenas and whatnot.
Or like Jim Jordan.
It's going to come out of the House, right? So if the Democrats take the House, that'll be like one less thing that she has to worry about.
Yeah, I'm interested in watching how this plays out because obviously 435 seats that are all up for grabs. I think there's not going to be a lot of upsets this time around. I think a lot of voters are actually nervous about what's going to happen because it's a tight race between Trump and Harris, that I think they're going to look for some stability elsewhere. And I think the down ballot on the House ticket is where they're going to find that stability. So I think there's not going to be, maybe an upset with Sherrod Brown, stuff like that, like people that have been there forever and ever, that there might be a little shift and change. But outside of that, I think the House is going to look pretty much the same next week.
We shall see. Moving on, Boeing's 33,000 production workers are back on the job. They voted to end their 7-week strike. They've approved a 38% pay raise over 4 years. That's the aerospace company's 4th contract offer since September. The latest offer falls 2 points shy of the 40% that the union wanted, but significantly higher than the 25% offer that they turned down back in September. That's prompted the walkout, brought the company to a complete standstill. This raises average machinist pay, to $119,000 a year. I think I might need to reconsider.
Wow.
my occupation here. For workers who are largely based in Seattle and Portland, Oregon, union members can now return to work as soon as tomorrow or as late as November 12th. Boeing reported a 6.1 billion with a B quarterly loss last month. Analysts say that the strike cost Boeing tens of millions of dollars in lost revenue per day. Shares fell percent this year over this strike, and concerns over,
shares
of
dropped
course, Boeing's
40%.
40%. Good share to short sell, and
Right.
concerns over Boeing's 737 Max aircraft. So Boeing's been a shit show. I mean, there's just no.
Yeah,
I thought the timing was super interesting that this strike came to an end the day before Election Day. Anything? Do you read anything into that?
I do, but I can also see how it's just by chance that, I mean, I'm not going to say that Boeing folded on the demands, because they obviously didn't, but I mean, it's a negotiation, right? I mean, but I think this is a big
They
win
folded.
for
Of course
labor.
they folded. I mean, look, I mean, they offered 25. The union wanted 40. They got 38.
It's a huge
They
win
folded.
for labor.
Yeah.
It's a huge win for labor. The ball moved way over in their favor. So I think Boeing has been, like you said, a shit show. And not only the Max jets crashing, killing everybody on board, but then recently they stranded astronauts in outer space, and Elon Musk had to go rescue them. So it's like
Oops.
one bad piece of news after another, and then you get the strike, and then their shares drop 40%. That is massive. But at the end of the day, Ted, we also really need to look at how much these Boeing executives are actually raking in, regardless of what the stocks do, regardless of what the contracts look like. They are the ones doing a shit job, right? The buck should stop with them. And their pay, their contract should be directly tied to how the stock is performing, how the company is performing, and how well they're doing as a business in general in serving humans, because it's general aviation for the most part. That's their bread and butter. We fly on their planes. If you are putting out junk products, you as the CEO should get junk pay. That's all.
Manila, I want to stand up for these Boeing executives. I mean, first of all, I mean, okay, so there's a hole in the plane sometimes, but look, that makes the plane lighter.
Door might fly off sometimes midair.
Be lighter if it weighs less, and planes can get stuffy. Who doesn't need a little ventilation? I'm always like, oh my God, I have asthma. And I'm like, I for one would welcome the biggest window in the world to look over the city of Seattle with.
Yeah, that's true. We can look at it as natural ventilation. It's less CO2 being put out. They're using less air conditioning, right? So it's like less demand on. But then if we're going to say saving fuel, but then you're going to get the lag from the wind.
There is that issue.
So
yeah.
It's kind of like, but I think their product. I'm going to be honest, Ted. I know, I'm not the only one out there, but when I have to book flights, I genuinely look not only at the price of the ticket, but what plane the carrier uses.
Yep.
And I try to avoid a Boeing jet as much as possible. I specifically fly Alaska Airlines because the majority of their fleet
that terrifying Yeti on the back of it.
Well, that too. I thought it was an Eskimo, but at any rate, the majority of their fleet are Airbus, which is a great French, manufacturer. Oui.
Yeah, no, the Airbus has had a very. I always think Airbus is an unfortunate name, but they have a good safety record for sure.
Right. I'll take Airbus.
In fairness, I mean, well, there's no in fairness. I mean, I was in the room interviewing Ralph Nader for one of my books when he got the news that his grandniece had died on that Boeing 737 MAX 8 flight.
Oh my God.
She was a beautiful young lady who was working for NGO there in the Horn of Africa, and she was on her way home, or trying to be. And of course, for people who forgot what happened there, basically Boeing had sent a digital update, sort of like when you have a Tesla, you get a digital update on your car, and it was a digital update that went into the control systems of the in the cockpit, and they didn't notify all the pilots that,
The
like,
MCAS,
hey, when
the
you
MCAS
know, it's
system.
kind of like if you have a laptop computer, and like on my laptop computer, F11 clears the screen, but like they changed that and said, oh yeah, and then suddenly they don't tell you, and then F11 does something else, like it shuts down the computer.
Oh my God. Yeah,
And
the
so
MCAS system
something
was
happened. There was some shear. They tried to respond the way that they had been trained to do. Pilots absolutely did nothing wrong at all
right.
on Lion Air, and then what they did that was supposed to work brought down the plane. This happened twice in just a very short period of time, and I'll never forget the look on Nader's face
Oh my
when
God.
he got that news. He was amazing. He was like, I don't know what happened. He said immediately, he goes, but I bet this is corporate malfeasance. And it was like, I was thinking at the time, well, of course, you're Ralph Nader. You would think that. But he was right.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, I mean,
So,
what more is
all right,
there to
let's
say? Is that
one more.
corporate,
Let's get
it's
through
all
it.
money. It's less safety, all money.
It was Bernie Marcus, the billionaire Home Depot co-founder and a mega donor to the GOP, who in recent years became an outspoken supporter of Trump, is dead. That, according to an internal memo obtained by CNN. That's the strangest sourcing for a death I've ever heard in my life. He was 95 years old. Marcus had a net worth of about $7.4 billion, according to Bloomberg. He gained his fortune from establishing the Home Depot with Arthur Blank in 1978. The two grew the retailer into a retail behemoth that you can now find pretty much anywhere in the United States. It has 2,300 stores and a market cap of $400 billion. Marcus was CEO of Home Depot until 1997. He was chairman until he retired in 2002. Home Depot, that's an amazing place. It has, however, it's worth noting that Home Depot completely devastated local lumber yards and mom and pop hardware stores all over the country. Basically, they were the Barnes and they did to hardware stores what Barnes and Noble did to independent bookstores. So it's not all not all lovely. Not to mention, you don't get the kind of help at Home Depot, knowledgeable help that you get at from your helpful true hardware man, or lady,
Agreed.
trans person, whatever. So it's but it's still very they're absolutely corporate.
It's notable. Yeah,
Very
it is a notable death. And this guy, obviously,
by the way, they must have made much money during the pandemic, right? Because everybody during the pandemic was like, we're home. Let's do some of those long delayed home projects.
We did. We went to Home Depot. We did little bath, we had nothing to do at home. So we, remodeled a bathroom, the powder room, did small fixes, whatever we could do ourselves. Cause there's nothing else I could do all day. So of course, everybody patronizes Home Depot. So whether or not you agree with Bernie Marcus's, positions on politics or whatever, he was obviously a guy that revolutionized, home improvement. So
no question.
Got to give him due.
No question.
Got to give the guy due.
Yeah. All right. So,
so
I guess now
with that,
we're done.
Yeah,
with
I see. We're done with headlines. I see our guest is in the virtual waiting room. So speaking of revolutionaries, right, and people that, or luminaries, as it were, people that really changed the landscape of the world as we know it, we have our guest coming up on the other side of this. So
who's running for president of the United States in today's election?
Yes, and he is good enough to join us. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit the jaws and bring him in. How about it? Yeah, let's do it. All right. So for all of the viewers out there who have been saying, get this person, we got this person. And I've been trying to connect with him for literally the since COVID, really, the last several years to get him on the show, but our schedules have never aligned. But he's always been so gracious and kind, and it's finally worked out today. So we want to go ahead and bring in this. I guess we can call him like a real mover and shaker in this world that perhaps a lot of people may not have ever heard of. Dr. Shiva Ayadurai is joining us right now. Dr. Shiva, hello, good morning. Let me give you a proper introduction. For those who don't know, Dr. Shiva Ayadurai is the inventor of the email that you are using every day, that everybody uses. He holds 4 degrees, just four degrees from MIT. He's a Fulbright scholar and has started 7 successful high-tech companies. He's the founder and CEO of CytoSolve Inc., which is currently discovering cures for major diseases, everything from pancreatic cancer to even Alzheimer's, which, you know, if you weren't such a slacker, Dr. Shiva, you would have helped Joe Biden already. Thank you so much for joining us, Doctor. Good to see you.
Very nice to be here. How are you?
Very well. This is a big day, obviously, here in America. Ted and I have been joking. We've been calling it Doomsday 2024 because it's less of an election, more of a selection process. And part of that, you wanted to fight against the machine and throw your hat into the ring. And you've managed to get your name on a handful of states' ballots. Can you tell us about that process, what you've been doing, and what your platform looks like for those who don't know and haven't gone to vote yet?
Yeah, so let me just peel back. I think in 2020, a lot of people came to know about my work. We reached close to, when we looked at all the unique video views, close to 500 million people throughout the world. It's quite enormous. We did the pioneering work, exposing the lockdowns. We ran that hashtag Fire Fauci campaign. I was the one to expose the fact that the government has a backdoor portal into all the social media companies. I won a historic lawsuit representing myself. In 2020 is when I ran for Senate in the Republican Party in a primary. And by all accounts, we were going to win that on a landslide. And it was the Republicans who colluded with the Democrats to steal that election. In Franklin County in Massachusetts, there's 9 counties. We won by 10 points by hand counted. It was all the ballots are all hand counted, and all the other counties was 60-40, 60-40, 60-40. And we had, I think we raised about $2 million, 3,000 volunteers. The opposition to the Republican put up had no volunteers. You couldn't even find one lawn sign. So that's when I started recognizing that there's something, malevolent going on. And we're the ones who uncovered the fact that you can flip votes on these machines, that the signature verification process is flawed. Now, Trump, the scumbag that he is, he took all of our knowledge. He raised $500 million off of it, of which he only spent $9 million. And then he invited me to meet with him in Mar-a-Lago the night after he had endorsed a guy who committed the election fraud, and I refused to go. Anyway, eventually I went and met with him, and it was sort of looking at a sorry individual who looked like in the backstage as an actor. So I have had experience with all of these people at very, very, deep and high levels. But what I can tell you is that after 2020, a lot of people came to know about us. Right. When I was a kid growing up in New Jersey, I did, in fact, invent the first email system, email as we know it today. The problem is that people who actually do the work never spend as much time getting the promotional, doing the PR.
Sure.
Those who do not do the work spend all the time doing the PR, like Elon Musk. Where Elon Musk begins and when government ends, nobody knows. He doesn't really invent anything. He takes over companies and pushes the founders out and then rewrites history as though he's some great inventor. But, when I was growing up as a kid in 1978 in Jersey, I was very, very hardworking. By the age of 14, I, in fact, had ended up going to New York University in a special computer science program. And then I started working full-time at a medical school while in high school, where I converted the old-fashioned inter-office mail system into the electronic version, named it email, wrote 50,000 lines of code, and all this before I came to MIT. So when I came to MIT, I was very interested in medicine, but also politics, because I grew up in the caste system of India, where it denigrated people based on their birth. And sort of that's where we're at today. If you look at all these politicians running, be it Booby Kennedy or Jill Stein, as I call her, or Trump or Harris, all these people are anointed from the top. They do not have to ever really work. But the movement that we have created now, which is a global movement called Truth to Freedom Health, people can go to truthfreedomhealth.com. It's a global movement that emerged out of 2020, where people recognize that there are real leaders like myself who will tell the truth at the right time, not when it's opportunistic to tell the truth to get views and clicks, 2 to 3 years later. So we've built a global movement, and that movement powered my run for president. And no one thought we'd even get it on any ballot. Just let people know, it's very difficult to get on a ballot. Every state have different rules. You have to get electors in every state. In California, we needed 108 electors, right? We have the Electoral College in the United States. No one elects a president. They elect slates of electors who then, if that slate is voted, wins, and they pledge to that candidate, right? So when you vote for Trump, you're not voting for Trump. You're voting for his electors in, let's say, Massachusetts or Michigan. You're voting for...
Right, you're on the ballot there in your home state of Massachusetts.
You're on the ballot, which is the hardest state to get on, 20,000 signatures. Then you have to get those signatures verified by 350 towns. We did this in 10 days. In Iowa, which is like the centerpiece of the presidential elections, we're on the ballot there. Jill Stein couldn't even get on the ballot there. And she's a liberal Zionist. The establishment will now give her air and will give her media attention because they know the unit party exists. So in order to confuse people as though there's some opposition, they'll create their own opposition. That's what Kennedy was. And we exposed Kennedy for what he really is. Kennedy really doesn't care about health. He was promoting full vaccination of all Americans. He vaccinated all of his kids. He made sure everyone had to be vaccinated before they came into his own home in Malibu. Okay? The Kennedys are the epitome of the not so obvious establishment. They are created and supported by the establishment to act like they're anti-establishment. Very much like Bernie Sanders, very much like Jesse Jackson or the Tea Party. They'll speak a good game because the bottom line is they do not want us, working people, identifying our own leaders like me, who come from below, actually do the work, building our own bottoms-up movements. Because history shows it's only been real leaders who emerge from below, who drive major movements, that has always changed anything. It has never been top-down elections. So us getting on the ballot, we're on the ballot in nearly every state, except 6 states, where people can write us in, or they can select us on with the dot, right, with the listed. That's quite extraordinary. We did that with less than $100,000, all powered by. Think about this. Kennedy raised $20 million, $20 million, and he was paying signature people $10, and he still couldn't get on the ballot. Okay, Jill Stein, with all of her Green Party, couldn't get on the ballot in Iowa. We had our volunteers.
You're not the only person who's
to go to
Dr. Shiva. Sorry to interrupt.
To get on the ballot.
You're not the only person who's complained. Many people have complained about the difficulty of getting on the ballot. I live here in New York, which, as you know, is also a state that's very difficult to get on the ballot.
People can write us in there, by the way. Yeah. I
had to, and I already voted, and I did have to write in the candidate of my choice. I voted Dr. Jill Stein. I guess the question like, oh, will they count your vote if you write Dr. Jill Stein as opposed to Jill Stein, or if you forget to write her running mate Butch Ware? I mean, it's very arcane. I mean, is there any chance that ballot access could be simplified and made fairer, given the fact that you have the duopoly in charge, and it's to their advantage? They've created this Byzantine system that it makes it hard for outsiders like yourself to access the voters. I think most voters don't have any problem with there being a lot of choices on the ballot, even if they themselves are going to vote Democrat or Republican. I don't think many people object that much to the choice there. Is there any world in which the Democrats and the Republicans could be pressured into state by state reforming these, exclusionary systems?
Well, first of all, our campaign now has 6 lawsuits in federal court, 2 in the appellate court and 1 in the United States Supreme Court. Kennedy talked about ballot access, same with Jill Stein, but they didn't fight as hard we have, and we did it without lawyers. We have trained our own people to fight. We have an electrician presenting himself in federal court. You see, we're not powered by the elites. The Green Party is a nouveau liberal elite party that they're positioning to be an opposition party. So we have actually fought for ballot access. If you talk to Richard Winger, you may know, is like one of the leading ballot access guys. He's 82 years old. He's been doing it since 1969. And he just wrote a piece and he said the Dr. Shiva campaign is the only campaign that now has 7 major ballot access lawsuits, real lawsuits. So when we look at ballot access, you have to recognize up until the 1900s, it was very easy to get on the ballot. You just had to get 2 signatures and you got on the ballot. Running for office was an aspect of the First Amendment right, the right to associate. Okay, so ballot access was very easy. It was the Tammany Hall crowd in the 1900s who, in many ways, made ballot access so corrupt. So, for example, they made it, you had to get thousands of signatures. In California, if you get 300,000 signatures, or you have to hijack another party who will then support you. So we actually regressed. Things were actually, it's not like it was bad always. It was actually quite good up until the 1900s. It went backwards starting in the late 1900s. And a lot of that was driven by the anti-communist rhetoric because they didn't want bottoms-up parties getting on. So they wanted to isolate people. And a lot of that also had to do with the fact in the late 1800s and early 1900s, it was called the Great Upheaval in the United States. There was bottoms-up mass movements that scared the shit out of the elites. So the elites were so scared there was going to be a revolution in the country in the 1900s, early 1930s. They had Franklin Delano Roosevelt give reforms to these people, and they branded him as some great hero. When it wasn't them, it was women and men fighting on the streets. So to build these very powerful militant movements. So they don't want to see that. They rather have a Jill Stein, acting like though she's going to be the liberal elite, talking about stuff when she is a liberal Zionist, for example. She was supporting lockdowns, etc. So in a consistent way, the establishment always finds, cherry picks and anoints and gives visibility to people to act radical. Bernie Sanders. You may have voted for Bernie Sanders. A lot of the Jill Stein crowd voted for Bernie. So they have gotten this
I did when I was in California.
Yeah. So, but they do not want someone like me who's annoyed by them. Many friends of mine were in the Green Party said just one day, 7 people got together and they anointed Jill Stein. Okay. Jill Stein is also the one who threw Cynthia McKinney, a Black woman, out of the Green Party because she asserted that 9/11 may have been caused by the Israelis. You see? So the establishment has a recurrent way of making sure people really don't build these bottoms-up movements. But that's what we're doing. We're the revolutionary force that they must make invisible. In fact, it was Jill Stein in the free and fair elections that kept me off the debate stage.
I was just going to ask you about that.
Yeah,
I was just going to ask you about that. That there's dirty tricks that obviously, like Kennedy highlighted that this is what happened to me, and they won't let me debate, blah blah blah. But
well, let's clarify this debate. We're not talking about the former Commission on Presidential Debates, which doesn't exist anymore. We're not talking about the big debate between the D's.
Right. No, we're talking about the so-called alternative debate.
Right.
So my point is, one of the things we teach at truthfreedomhealth.com, I have been wanting to crack the code on why is it that there's human suffering that continues. And what you find out is that there's 2 heads of the establishment, the obvious establishment, the Bushes and the Clintons, you can name them. But the real evil is the not so obvious establishment. You see, the establishment needs 2 heads to survive. The obvious one people can attack. Oh my God, they're horrible. They're pro-war. They want to screw us. But they cannot survive without the not so obvious establishment. The not so obvious establishment is that force that the establishment anoints and creates to be their own controlled opposition. So because they know
you're saying it's kind of like in Orwell in 1984, right, where the party has a monolith that controls everything. And they got Emmanuel Goldstein, who is fake and doesn't really exist, but he's the fake opposition leader.
Right. And this is a scientific, in system science, we call it a disturbance, right? So in this case, the establishment, so everyone should, if you want to really get it, so you don't waste 30, 40 years of your time, one day voting for Obama, another day for Jill Stein, and another day for Tulsi Gabbard, go watch shattertheswarm.com. Shatter the Swarm. It's how the few control the many. So the swarm needs both of these two heads. And this is an understanding that people don't get. So they jump from bed to bed to bed, following their next anti-establishment rhetoric. The real force is a revolutionary force, which says, fuck all these people. We need to build a bottoms-up movement. And that is what my life journey is about, because I come from the bottom. I come from the Indian caste system. I come from New Jersey among working class towns. Okay? So they don't want that voice ever to be heard because it is too dangerous. And they surely do not want that voice to have an MIT PhD, which earned all their, anointments, right? Because this is even more dangerous. So the reality is the swarm has these two heads. And consistently, when you chop off when there's been very rare that you can expose a not so obvious establishment. So if you go to 1984, which is an interesting year, I was a student at MIT, and a lot of us young people, I was 17, were enamored by a guy called Jesse Jackson. He was speaking all this anti-establishment rhetoric. And then on the night of the Democratic Convention, he gives a sorry-ass speech, and he gives all of his votes to Walter Mondale, talking about the lesser of evils. He was a Jill Stein of the time, or the Kennedy. And that's when we figured out, wait a minute, they keep doing this. Gandhi was that equivalent in India. There was a British who were butchering the Indian people, exploiting them. There was a revolutionary movement. They created Gandhi to quiet down the Indian masses. And for 70 years, India had massive exploitation. Okay? So this is a very central thing that people need to understand, or you're bullshitting yourselves. So when I figured this out, I realized it has to be bottoms-up movements. So now you saw that again with the Ron Paul movement. Ron Paul talked a big game, and then at the end of the day, he bent over and he really didn't fight, right? So he lost. Romney comes and he loses to Obama. Then you had Sanders. I had a lot of my friends in 2016 who said, oh my God, Dr. Shiva, Bernie Sanders is anti-establishment. You must work with him. I said, he's going to fucking sell you out. He will. I said, mark my words, on the floor of the Democratic Convention, he will hug Hillary Clinton like Jesse Jackson did, and he's going to screw you. A very good friend of mine, very smart neuroscientist out of Harvard, said, no, you're an asshole, Shiva. You're always critiquing people. And she was the head of the Bernie Sanders campaign for all of New England. She stormed out of my house. I never heard from her for 2 years. 2 years later, she called me crying. She goes, everything you said was right. I go, what are you doing now? Oh, I'm in a cottage up in Canada. So these people are created. So they invite very sincere people, and then they demoralize them. Because these people are created to demoralize bottoms-up movements. And that is what Trump did. Trump talked a big MAGA game. And then he delivered everything the elites wanted. He delivered them the pandemic. He made sure pharma made, 100 billion more than they ever did before. I mean, you can go down the list. As sure. Zionist as you can get. So now in this election, they didn't expect a revolutionary to run, which is what we are. And we expose the shit out of Kennedy, which you're not supposed to touch. And all these fools thinking, oh, Kennedy's this, Kennedy's that. We exposed him for 4 years. So he had to run with his tail underneath his legs to strike, and he struck a deal with Trump to make money off of it. Where did his 20 million go that he pocketed? So now to replace that, they need Jill Stein, you see? And they'll bring out this fool Cornel West from time to time, out of Princeton, to act as though he's a radical. But they will not. They're too afraid to give us one mainstream media attention. I mean, it's quite extraordinary. And so the alternative media is owned by them. So the alternative so-called decides to run a free and fair elections debate. Why are we left out of it? I fulfilled all the things. I'm polling higher than Chase Oliver. They're libertarian fool. That's not only racist, it's discriminatory, but they're doing the exact same game.
Well, what did
Doctor,
they tell you?
Let me pause you. Let me pause you on that, because you're bringing up race. Obviously, we have to point out, obviously, that Kamala Harris is half Indian, right? Half Indian and Jamaican descent. They've highlighted this in her campaign, as short as it is. And they've made race, obviously the Democrats have made race an issue for many, many, many years, but they're highlighting, in the 11th hour, the fact that she is half Indian. They've been, harping on the black thing for quite a while, but the Indian part. If we really zoom out though, Dr. Shiva, if we look at American politics, I would say since the 2020s, you would see that of all the Asians, of Asian diaspora around this country, Indian Americans have really been making a big splash in American politics. We've seen people like Vivek Ramaswamy,
Yeah,
Nikki
he's a
Haley.
snake. He's a complete
So,
scumbag.
yeah, so
He's
a lot of
so let's
Indian Americans.
I think people need to
Let's talk about
understand that the discussion on race has really not taken place in the United States. It's always been the right wing says there is no racism, and the left wing owns racism, but they absolve the issue of class and caste. Okay? So left wing white liberals have no idea what racism really is because we've never had a real discussion from the people actually been discriminated bottoms up like guys like me. Racism is an instrument of class war. That's what it is. Racism and an instrument of class war. And so because you do not want to address the class issues or the caste issues, you talk about race or skin color. Kamala Harris is a Brahmin. Vivek Ramaswamy is a Brahmin. 90% of the Indians in the United States are Brahmins. My parents are non-Brahmins. So 95% of India is non-Brahmins. Okay? The Brahmins spit on the Indians. If the American people really knew, if white liberals so-called knew how non-Brahmins are treated in India, they would completely shun all these Brahmin Indians. The Brahmin Indians are the most racist Indians on the planet. Let me talk to you about that. Because when my mother grew up in India, when I grew up, it was like segregation. If I went to a Brahmin's home, I was told to sit outside, given water in a dirty cup, and spit upon. And those were my earliest memories as a 4-year-old kid. And Kamala Harris's ancestors would do that to my mother, my family, because we were dark-skinned, non-Brahmins, quote-unquote, untouchables. So the fact that my parents even made it here, my mother, there's a picture of her getting her degree, which is unheard of in the 1940s. This dark-skinned Indian women are among 40 light-skinned Brahmin men with turbans. My dad came from war-torn Burma. I have the real story. I don't need to fake my story. Kamala Harris comes from a Brahmin family. While I was in New Jersey, sweating it out, literally in the summer heat, mowing lawns to make money, she was in Montreal learning French. She has no idea of the American journey. So let's get real here. The liberal white elites, all of you out there, really talk about your own racism because you have used race to don't use the N-word, don't use these perfunctory things, but you don't want to talk about the real racism. The real racism is occurring right in front of Vivek Ramaswamy. They created him, poof, because they saw me in 2020 to 2024. They said, shit, we can't have a revolutionary brown-skinned guy. So we must create these fake Indian Brahmins. And that's why you've seen over the last 12 months, these people promoted fake Indians.
Yeah.
They don't represent the Indian community. Kamala Harris has no idea of the immigrant journey. Vivek Ramaswamy is a bullshitting Brahmin, big pharma bullshitter. Look at his whole life.
Big pharma bro, for sure.
He's a big pharma company. So, and they literally come to my Zooms. Kennedy has come to my Zooms with his people. They steal my words. Literally, they make videos because my words are the real words of the oppressed. Their words are made to confuse people back into the establishment thinking Kennedy's going to do something, or Bernie Sanders, who's never held a job in his life. So our campaign is real. It's bottoms up.
So Dr. Shiva, I mean, look, I come from a Marxist orientation, and I think a lot of people might be watching us here today, and might say,
well, remember what Engels said, Marxists are the worst people. That's what Engels said.
Let me finish my point, though.
Actual communism and socialism. So we can talk about real communism and socialism, but most Marxists have sold out Lenin and Marx.
Well, I'm definitely into that, but let me.
Yeah.
I just want to ask you this question. So a lot of people would ask, how could you be a credible representative of the masses or the voices from below, considering, we, in the introduction, you're, a very successful man. You've done well under capitalism. Do you see a contradiction there?
No, why do you see a contradiction?
Well, I mean, there are people. I personally don't.
You just said you're a Marxist. Where did Marx
write? For example, I know.
No. But look at what you're asking. No. But look at what you're asking. You just look at the. Hate to say it, it's really a dumb question, because where did Marx come from? He was highly educated.
Yes, he was. Yeah, he was.
Right.
He was an intellectual.
And what did Marx say about the intellectuals? Marx said the intellectuals are not a class. They make a decision on which class that they want to defend and support. Okay? So if you go read Marx again.
The vanguard.
Right. Well, if they choose to be. So I could have been on that trajectory to be an MIT professor, which is a trajectory, but I chose to take the knowledge of system science and to help the masses, because that's where I come from. Every time I go to India, I go back to my small village. So you don't know my journey. All right. Mm-hmm. Just because I got education doesn't mean I'm one of them. In fact, my whole life has been fighting them. From the age I was 4 years old, I never forgot where I came from.
I mean, Bernie Sanders grew up in poverty.
No, let me finish.
You mentioned Bernie Sanders. He did grow up.
This is not a contradiction. Yeah. Just because I took their weapons and I want to use it against them, that's the decision. Some people learn the knowledge of system science, the knowledge of how systems work, like George Soros or Zbigniew Brzezinski or Kissinger, and they choose to fight for the elites. I choose a very different path. It's a much harder path.
So what would you say your presidential platform is? You're running as an independent. You're obviously, as an independent, you have every right to criticize any and everybody in all the other parties. So what exactly, if you can put it in a nutshell, what is your presidential campaign's position on various things like the economy, unemployment, obviously a major issue, immigration, and the ongoing wars in Gaza and Ukraine?
Yeah, if you look at my tweet thing, there's a one-page nice little thing which outlines every political position. Let me summarize it for you. Number one, when you look at the fundamental issue, foreign policy and economic policy are tied at the hip. You cannot separate them. Okay? So the U.S. foreign policy is directly connected to the printing of money. Why do I say that? So let me explain this. So we must recognize this reality that the United States gets to be the reserve currency, which means you can print money all day. And when you print money all day, cost of living goes up. So our fundamental premise is, if you look at, we put out 10 million of these little cards, which show cost of living going up since 1970 and lifespan now coming down. If you have a child today, your child is going to have a shorter lifespan than you. Kennedy didn't talk about this. He literally stole our graphs and started using it more recently. Okay. But cost of living has been going up explosively since 1970, and lifespan has been going down for the last 20 years. Okay. So that's the thesis. Now, how do you solve that? Well, the reason cost of living is going up is because as the reserve currency, the new theory called modern monetary theory dictates print as much money as you want. Okay. Print money. That is the modus operandi, where it's left or right. You saw Trump print 8 trillion. Obama printed Trump did 8 trillion in one term. Obama did 2 terms. Okay. So the printing of money, the reserve currency status of the United States, is only possible by the very fact that behind the dollar is no longer gold, no longer petroleum, but it's F-15s, it's B-52 bombers, it's Israel in the Middle East, a big aircraft carrier. Okay. So the United States must conduct war, requires war, to maintain reserve currency status. Does that make sense? And once you can maintain reserve currency status, you print money. And if you look during the pandemic, all the money that was printed, 600 billion, 2.3 trillion of that went to Trump's friends or the elite's friends. 600 billionaires increased their wealth by 2.3 trillion, including the scumbag Elon Musk. Okay. So this is a dynamic people need to understand. So as long as the United States is able to maintain reserve currency status by starting wars, they must do wars. They must print money, and cost of living is going to go up and lifespan is going to go down. So here's the solution. Number one, we must cut all funding to Israel. Every fucking penny. Every penny. Number two, there are people in the Congress of the United States, 90% of them, who get funding from AIPAC. 90% of them. Okay? We must actually conduct investigations on them, which the enforcement division under the executive branch can do. The penalties can only come from Congress. But all funding to Israel must be cut. All of these foreign wars must end. We must, to the extent we have a defense budget, it must be used for defending the United States borders, period. The other piece that needs to happen is that when you start looking at the foundations of, let's say, healthcare and education, the solutions are actually quite simple. 99% of these politicians can't even explain the healthcare system. In fact, none of my opponents can even talk about 2 very particular entities the reason why healthcare is the way it is. It's called GPOs and PBMs. Have you guys heard of those two organizations?
No, not me anyway.
Do you know about who GPOs and PBMs are? Okay. In the early 2000s, these two organizations were made legal by Congress to conduct corruption. So if you look at a healthcare bill, a simple, procedure, which should only cost $1,000, it will cost $100,000. Why? Because in the 1970s, a collusion took place between hospitals, big pharma, and the insurance companies. And it continued until 2000 when legalized corruption was made possible. Every item in a hospital, every item that's purchased by a hospital goes through three major GPOs, group purchasing organizations. Each of them are owned by insurance companies. So the bracket is all insulin, saline, the bedpan, the sheets are going through three organizations who control the supply chain. Similarly, on the pharmaceutical side, PBMs. This was allowed by Congress through lobbying efforts. So it's not that healthcare is bad or good. The cost is too high. And the cost is high because the insurance companies are incentivized to keep the costs high. Because then you go get insurance. I pay $1,200 for insurance. Why? Because you're under the fear, oh my God, something bad may occur. I may have a catastrophic incident. You say? All right.
Sure.
So what's the solution? My solution is, number one, you have to illegalize GPOs and PBMs. You're going to immediately see a reduction in healthcare costs. Number two, we must allow more broadly DPCs, direct primary care. There are a set of doctors, around 2,000 to 3,000 of them, who are saying, I don't take insurance anymore. Simply pay me $75 a month, and I will take care of all your needs. 80% of the needs you need can be taken care of with your primary care. The primary care physician agrees to only take 500 patients, and he's making $500,000 and he's happy a year, okay? Then for crisis care, you get crisis insurance for about $150. So less than $300, you can have great health care. But we must demolish the GPOs and PBMs. Trump didn't do that.
Can I pause you right there? I pause you right there, Doctor? Can I pause you right there for just a second? Because this week, actually last week, I was actually in the hospital for about 40 hours. And because of the hurricanes that destroyed the Baxter saline solution factory in North Carolina, I was only allowed to be given one bag of saline solution. So when I was given other medications through the IV drip, it was sans the saline solution. Would you say you would want to nationalize stuff like that?
No. I don't believe in nationalization. I believe in, I'll get to that. But the point is, the reason you had that saline issue is nothing to do with Baxter. If you go to hospitals throughout the country, they've all been having shortages because the GPOs squeeze the hospital administrators because they own all the supply. So they say, well, if you don't buy it at this price, I'm not going to sell it to you. Okay. That's why there's shortages of even insulin or basic stuff in hospitals. And this was authorized by Congress. GPOs and PBMs must be made illegal because they give kickbacks to the hospital administrators who buy more volume. They give them 7-star vacations. Okay. Again, no one will talk about this because no one wants to talk about the real problem. They'll just talk about bullshit all day. Let's talk about education. Up until the 1970s, people went to vo-tech schools. You came out of high school, you had a real job. Well, suddenly we started pushing the concept of go to college, go to college, go to college. I'm sorry, I didn't even need to go to MIT. I invented email before I came to MIT. I knew more in my public school educational system than I even learned at MIT, to tell all of you guys the facts. Because my public school education system was run by very hardworking public school teachers. Now, having said that, a lot of people send their kids to college. And when people send their kids to college, the parents have to go get a 100, 200K student loan.
Right.
It's funny they call it a student loan. It's not a student loan. It's a university loan. Because a loan, follow this through, the parents mortgage their house and they take a loan. The money for their tuition is going to the university. What does a university do with 80% of that loan? They put it into their endowment, which they have highly trained hedge fund managers invest that in Wall Street. Universities now are investment companies. They happen to do some education. Harvard, for example, increased their wealth by billions of dollars. They paid 5 of their hedge fund managers $50 million in 1 year. So here's my solution to that. Have the universities co-sign the loans. Let me repeat that. The parents shouldn't co-sign the loans of universities. Why? So you have a young kid, 17, 18. He doesn't know jack shit about what he should be doing. So he says, I'm going to become an aardvark transgender specialist. I'm going to learn aardvark biology, something like this. Okay. He comes out of 4 years. He can't even get a job. For example, if the universities had to co-sign the loan, they're going to direct the kid, hey, that's fine. You want to learn aardvark biology of transgenderism. Why don't you actually learn engineering? Why don't you take a nursing degree? Okay. Because they are not going to get paid back.
Direct investment on the outcomes of their degree.
Yes. But so the incentives are all wrong by design, because now the kid goes into debt. They take the parents more. I mean, there's many, many stories of this. So again, that's a very clear solution. The other piece is, let's really talk about energy policy. Okay. Nuclear energy, fusion. We put nothing into this very important, relatively nothing into this very infinite source of energy. The reality is a climate change scam, by the way, which Jill Stein supports, is complete scam correlating CO2 increase with temperature increase based on mathematical models. There's 150 mathematical models. Each one of them predicts different outcomes. One says no ice is going to melt. The other says all the ice is going to melt, and all flavors in between. Now, as an engineer and a scientist, I build models. If your model is predictive, that means for every input you get, it's going to give the same, give the particular prediction. Evidence is reproducible predictions. So the whole climate change scam is built on absolute nonsense, garbage. And
Doctor, I've got to question you on that. I mean, now.
Let me finish. The goal is, there's a video I did going through this entire thing. It leads to carbon tax credits, and there's going to be people who are going to make trillions off carbon tax credits. And furthermore, the Paris Accords allows China to double their pollution, India to double their pollution from 11 cubic metric tons billion metric tons up to 22. So tell me, what is the benefit of the Paris Accords? Zippo. They're not talking about pollution. They're talking about CO2, which is one of the most necessary gases we need. It's complete bullshit. Neither
are you saying that climate change? Are you saying that climate change is not happening, or are you just saying that it's
no? So listen to the question you're asking. So please get out of the cult. Climate always changes. Climate will always keep changing. The issue is CO2 levels correlated to temperature increase. Okay. Now, in order to solve that, if you've taken an engineering course, you have to solve the Navier-Stokes equation. You can win $1 million right now if you can solve the Navier-Stokes equation for turbulent fluid. The oceans are a turbulent fluid. The atmosphere is a turbulent fluid. These fools who've been fooling people took two turbulent fluids, which there is no solution. That's why you have 150 models. It's all bullshit. Now, you're talking to someone who's actually done those equations. A colleague of mine at MIT, Dick Lindzen, was the only professor at MIT who had the guts to say, this is all bullshit. And he's the head of the meteorology department. When he did this, 140 professors attacked him. Why? Because there's $2 billion sitting there for university professors to get their grant money. The whole thing is bullshit.
Well, the whole recycling thing is total bullshit.
Well,
people are starting to, that part is true. I mean, I'm not a science person. I don't have a science background.
I haven't looked into that, but it probably is. But I can tell you.
I'll send you my whole report on it, Dr. Shiva. I did a whole story on it, a 30-minute special about the bullshit that is recycling, because less than 5% of all things that go in those blue bins, and I'm from California, mind you, that we grew up believing that we're doing something good. We're sorting our trash. We're doing this and that and the other thing. And like I said, in the 80s and 90s in California, we were the ones that started doing those recycle blue bins and the green bins. And then the rest of the country followed, and then the rest of the world followed. And this leads exactly to what you were talking about with the whole climate accords and the Europeans sending trash to India, sending trash to, brown countries. Brown Asia is getting polluted with Western garbage. And meanwhile, the whole EU is saying, oh, we're only 25% behind our goal, our stated goal for 2030 is what they're always saying, right? 2030, we're only a little bit behind. Well, the only reason they can pretend to be that little behind is because they're shipping off their recyclable goods to brown Asia, and brown Asians are dying of toxic diseases coming from the plastics from America.
Right, but that's okay if you kill brown people, you say? So white liberal elites in the United States talk about climate change, do all this
They
bullshit.
feel good though. They're recycling.
They feel good. And then meanwhile, they're getting a double whammy because so what happened with the Paris Accords was, and I don't know if you've read the IPCC report, it's around 20,000 pages. I went through the whole thing. It's bullshit.
Gee.
Okay? It's people just take these little sound bites. If you read all the stuff, it's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. However, it's the backup bullshit that they need to promote carbon tax. Al Gore sits on the board of a company which will own all these software that'll get a little piece of every carbon tax exchange. What is carbon tax? Carbon tax is incentivizing pollution. So they incentivize China to go from 11 billion metric tons of carbon to 22 billion. After that, 2030, China will have to buy carbon tax credits. Well, the carbon tax price on the commodities market is going to escalate. Who do you think is going to make all the fucking money? All right. And when the United States government at the Trump time was asked to create a green fund, the green fund was actually money to pay off to all the ministers of all these countries. So they advised their prime ministers to get involved in this nonsense. It was a corruption fund. So that's what is really going on. Again, the problem that you have is people making policy don't know math. They don't know jack shit about physics. And they conflate even Elon Musk, bullshitter, carbon and CO2. Carbon is a goddamn element on the periodic table. CO2 is a goddamn gas. Okay? So what are you talking about? So this is what's going on. And everyone should read C.P. Snow's great lecture. He's a great writer and a physical chemist that he wrote in the 1900s called The Two Cultures. It shows that we have these two cultures, one people thinking they know a lot about humanities, liberal humanities, but they don't even know the second law of thermodynamics. So before people open their mouth and say, oh yeah, climate changes and everything is, we need carbon tax. Climate does change, but CO2 levels are the lowest they've ever been. The reason human beings came was we had 10 times more CO2 levels. The potheads are all pumping CO2 into their, greenhouses to grow all their weed. So don't tell me CO2 is a bad thing. You need CO2. CO2 grows plants.
But we have major temperature. But we're in the middle of a major drought here. We have water restrictions.
Yeah, we've always had droughts.
It's going to be in the 80s. It's November 5th. It's going to be in the 80s this week in New York.
Look at how you're talking. I'm sorry, you're talking, not looking at the entire time span of things. Okay. Do you know how dumb what you just said is? I'm not telling you personally. Okay. Don't take it personally.
You're not the first person to call me dumb.
No, but you're sitting at a point in time which there have been droughts, sure. There have been floods. Okay. Climate is constantly changing, constantly. You have to look at it from a systems perspective. Since the last ice age at the end of the 1800s, it's expected temperature will go up 2 degrees. We have a melting of the ice age. Okay. The end of the ice age. Temperature is constantly changing. It's
but not this quickly. This is really fast, right? The change in temperature, the change in average global temperature is moving quickly.
It isn't fast. You are making up that very, very qualitative term. It's not based on any scientific principles. It's not. Sorry to tell you that. Here's the grand scheme of things. The sun is 6,000 degrees Kelvin, okay? Several billion years ago, the sun was only putting out 30% less degrees. Now, you would think if it was 30% less, only 4,000 degrees, the whole Earth should be ice, right? Shouldn't it? Guess what? There were flowing waters and waterfalls. Why? Because we have something called clouds. Do you know none of these climate change models included clouds? It's like not including the iris in your eyes. If I shine a bright light into you, your eyes know how to change to maintain homeostasis. So the Earth is an intelligent system. It can handle many, many different local and global fluctuations. The issue always in science is how much. I can give you mercury. You take a little bit of mercury, it's actually very good for your brain. You take too much, it'll destroy your brain. The issue in science is how much. In order to understand that how much, you have to do the mathematics. So the reality is they've done this bogus math. If you actually looked at just completely nonsense, it's garbage in, garbage out. They said, okay, now we know CO2 is a greenhouse gas. Yes, it increases temperature, but how much? So the reality is they've made up a model which doesn't even conform to the model itself. And using that, we're driving policy. But the end state of that policy is not to make the world better because we're not reducing pollution. The end state of that policy is to make a finite set of people trillionaires, and it's going to tax small businesses, and it's the working people of the world who are going to have to pay for that. And at the end stage,
true. Absolutely true.
The Al Gores, the Donald Trumps, the Jared Kushners, the Ivanka Trumps, the Hunter Bidens are all going to make a shitload of money because they know when to trade on carbon tax credits. That's the end state. Now, this is why we need a president like me who does the work, who understands it, can articulate it, can make it simple. Because we're at a point in history that we live in a world of complex systems. The world is complex systems, transportation systems, healthcare systems, climate systems. And people need to understand broadly how systems work. That's what we educate people. We have taken house, cleaners, estheticians, plumbers, electricians, and I teach them system science, the same shit I learned at MIT. And these people are taking that knowledge and really learning how to think. What we've created is a world of people who are told what to think. Climate change is, therefore, let's support Jill Stein. She's going to save us, or Booby fucking Kennedy. It's all bullshit. We teach people how to think, not what to think, how to think. And that's what education is supposed to be. So getting back to my platform, I've talked about healthcare. We talked about education. One of the important things people need to recognize is that taxation. I believe that we should eliminate all personal tax. Zero. It should go to zero. However, we should have very high corporate tax, 50 to 70%. You might think, what are you talking about? When the time the US economy grew, it was very high taxation in the 40s and 50s, upwards of 50%. Why do I say that? Because if you run a company, at the end of the year, large companies are incentivized now to not even have their companies in the United States, but to move it to Ireland, and then do all these machinations to hide their wealth. So what is tax based on? Tax is based on profit, income. Income is the revenue your company makes minus the expenses. And then you get profit, and that profit is taxed. Well, if you have very high corporate tax, what's it going to do? Well, company's going to say, shit, I made $2 billion this year. What should I do? Well, maybe I'll pay my employees a little more. That'll reduce my tax burden. Maybe I'll put in new infrastructure, update the infrastructure so we have the latest stuff. So you want to incentivize organizations like companies to expand, to do more training, right? To grow their businesses, not to hide capital. Think about how much capital Apple is sitting on, how much they're sitting on, and most of it's outside of the United States. So I believe in zero income tax for the individual, but a very high corporate tax. And when you work it out, it's actually going to expand society, because if I made $1 billion, I'm the CEO of the company, I'm going to say, shit, I got to pay, 50% tax on 500 billion. How do I reduce my tax burden? Let me share some of the wealth with my employees, and they don't have to pay tax. You say, let me buy new machinery. Let me do all these things. Let me give certain things to help my community. So that is a positive incentive. We don't do that right now. We have high corporate tax and we have high personal tax. And in fact, the elites, if they have enough good tax lawyers, they don't have to pay any tax. Amazon didn't pay any tax, right? Donald Trump doesn't pay any fucking taxes. Elon Musk gets tax subsidies. So the whole game is not based on anything rational. And ultimately, what I believe needs to happen, you talked about nationalization. The ultimate solution is we need to educate enough people to understand the system's nature, how things work. And that's what we've been doing. You talk to our volunteers of all different backgrounds. We're teaching them how to file lawsuits. They can teach you systems dynamics equivalent to an MIT graduate student, but they're everyday people. Once you understand systems thinking, you'll see through the climate change scam. You'll see through the healthcare systems, because we teach people how to look at systems, eliminate the left-right narrative, and find the actual solution.
Well,
you talked about Marx. Marx was one of the first system scientists. He was actually misunderstood on certain levels. And the Marxists that came after him had no idea what Marx said. So they just sort of followed a trajectory of thinking nationalization is a way. The ultimate solution is working people rise up, they raise their consciousness, and we seize the means of production. We have enough, the awesomeness of capitalism, now it's become imperialism, has created amazing efficiencies. We can make iPhones, they're probably costing only $2 to make, if that. We have more than enough food on the planet. The issue is capitalism makes so many goods at a cheap price after a while, it needs to create its own fake supply chain issues. So to keep price up, let me repeat that. We have more than enough food on this planet. We have created amazing instrumentation production. The fact, look at Amazon can transport an apple probably cheaper from Washington to Boston than to pick it over in my orchard, in my friend's orchard 2 miles away. So capitalism has created incredible efficiencies. But the negative side of capitalism when it becomes imperialist is that it's like the Ouroboros tail starts eating itself. It says, holy shit, I can make such cheap stuff, but I need to keep prices high to get my quarterly profits. Therefore, I'm going to create fake supply, fake, supply chain issues.
Sure.
So
Artificial.
it is overproduction in a fundamental way that actually creates the problems of these cyclical crises. In India, for example, people create so much rice. The government tells rice farmers to save it and to make alcohol out of it. So my position is, our telecommunication costs, people are paying $200 for cable TV. It's crazy. It should be pennies. So the only way out of it is working people need to raise their consciousness. At one point, the workers of the world must unite, but true socialism, we must seize those means of production, lower the cost, you say? Not this fake top-down socialism. There is a real socialism. The right wing wants to brand that real socialism as communist, and the left wing has stolen the words of socialism and talked about nationalism and nationalization. None of these are real socialism.
Dr. Shiva. So this is precisely why, we wanted to hear your thoughts, obviously, because you are somebody that is on the ballots on several states and able to write you in. And it's from the ground up, as you said, but the platform, I think people try to pigeonhole you and, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little libertarian. Nobody can kind of pinpoint exactly where you're at. So I think people have a hard time trying to wrap their brains
Well, actually, we have our platform
all that is Dr. Shiva.
Our platforms are listed right there. You could start with
Right.
Shatter the Swarm. The reality is the mainstream media or even the grifter media, if I was given the same amount of time as that free and fair elections, it would be over. It would be over. For Jill Stein and Chase Oliver and all those fools.
That's
over.
a whole other discussion.
No, but the issue is
about
this is actually racist and it's actually discrimination against all working people. They do not want
I
an
agree.
intelligent person.
They use race as a proxy. Absolutely.
Yes, but the real racism is a free and fair elections people who talk as though they are for the working people, talk alternative, but they deliberately, I spoke to the executive director of that organization. She goes, oh my God, Dr. Shiva, I love you. But she said, this is awful that they're doing this to you. So the reality is it is a deliberate effort. They do not want real competition.
Absolutely.
So you guys put me on here. But the reality is they do not want real people who are actually intelligent coming bottoms up like myself. I scared the shit out of them. Everyone knows all of our policies are out there. Because
I would agree.
We actually can look through the scam and educate people. You give me 1 hour of the amount of time that Jill fucking Stein has gotten or Booby fucking Kennedy, it would be over for them. And that is the real harm that they're doing to the American people by denying people, someone like me, having access to them. Yeah, it's absolute abuse. It is disgustingly abusive.
And that's why we wanted to invite you on. And I'm so grateful that you were able to carve out some time and explain to people all around the country and around the world that are watching what your platform is, who you are, and your opinions on all of these matters, because you, like you said, you are you don't come from a political background, obviously, and you come from academia and science.
Well, no, I come from work.
It's important
to let people know I come from a working background. I've been working since I was 14 years old, working full time. And
it's important for people to hear that.
Everyone needs to understand that. I have to go to a video right now. It's going to be a science video of the scientific research we did on understanding the combinations of natural medicines that can be used for natural relaxation. And so not only do I do this, but I also work full time as a scientist, publishing in the major journals. And then I'll go out on the ground and hand out flyers. You don't see quote unquote academics getting their hands dirty like that. So
you're an actual, you get sciences, absolutely. And of course, Dr. Shiva Ayyadurai. Am I saying? Are people saying that right? By the way, Dr.
You said
Shiva
it perfectly.
Ayyadurai.
Actually, you said it very well. Thank you.
Dr. Shiva Ayyadurai, he is, of course, the inventor of email. He's a presidential candidate. He's on the ballot on multiple states right now as we speak. So if you haven't gone to vote, you can write him in. You can vote for him in the states that he is officially on the ballot. Smart dude, has several degrees from MIT. He's a Fulbright scholar. He has started 7 successful high-tech companies, and he is presently the founder CEO of Cytosolve Inc., which is discovering cures for a lot of major diseases, anything from pancreatic cancer all the way to Alzheimer's. Dr. Shiva, of course, I think you just go by Dr. Shiva. Everybody knows you as
Yeah,
Dr.
so
Shiva.
Ted in Manila, there's 3 sites I want everyone to go to. Start
Please.
kindergarten training is at shattertheswarm.com. Everyone should go through that so you don't waste 30 years of your life. It'll really explain the dynamics. 15 minutes. There's no cursing in there. You can watch it with your kids. Shatter the Swarm. Then go to truthfreedomhealth.com. You will understand that we've put together an entire community, a global community, a university, an educational program so people can really learn how to get off the plantation on their own 2 feet without relying on top down. And so that's the 2 places. And obviously people should go to Shiva4president.com. We only have a couple, this day left, but get out there and vote or write in Dr. Shiva. And what I want to emphasize to people is when you do that, it's not this lesser of 2 evils nonsense. You're literally getting off the plantation mentally, and that's the win. Every person who votes or writes me, and what they're saying is in their mind that I'm off the plantation. And that's a good deal because now you can really build a explosive movement.
Yeah, absolutely. Today is, as we said, we've been joking, today is doomsday. And like you said, you vote, people should vote their conscience, not the lesser of 2 evils. Dr. Shiva Ayyadurai, thank you so much for making
Thanks
some
a lot,
extra
you
time
guys.
for us.
Thank
So
you for
glad
the
we
great
got to see you.
conversation. Yeah, be well. Be the light to both of you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye, Dr. Shiva. All right. I've actually got to go vote right after this. That's actually my plan to go do that today.
You
So
gonna vote for
obviously,
Dr. Shiva?
I still don't, like I said,
Put
I
you on the
vibe.
spot.
I'm one of those people, I know it sounds corny, but I've never voted based on party or single issue, but I do, it's like I'm feeling the vibes wherever, whenever, wherever
Well, which way are
I
the
am.
vibes blowing you today?
I don't know, but that's like when I hold the ballot in my
Let me
hand.
guess.
And I think a lot of people
Let's
like me.
eliminate some things. You're not voting for Kamala Harris. Yes.
I'm not
that's
voting for
fair
Kamala
to
Harris.
say.
I can eliminate that. But everybody
Okay, you're
else
not
is
voting
up for
for.
grabs.
Are you voting for Dr. Cornel West?
It's up for grabs. I like
Chase Oliver?
Dr. West.
No, you're not voting for Chase Oliver.
I'm not thrilled on him. He's probably closer to being axed. So if we kind of narrow this down, he's probably, he's not exactly my type of libertarian, but there's Trump, there's West,
I mean, if I were going to be a libertarian,
Stein,
I'd roll Chase Oliver.
and
So.
Dr. Shiva. So I mean, you can write in, who knows, or I might just completely write in whatever. Like, who knows?
Clovis.
But I kind of what do they call it? What do they call it when you enter? Oh, I forget the word because I'm not into this whole world, but I'm gonna sense what I need to do when I'm there. And like that's the whole like yogi crunchy thing.
You're gonna listen
you'll
to the
feel it.
universe.
I am. You will feel what the right thing to do is, because my brain says one thing and sometimes my heart says another. Sometimes they agree. But when that ballot is in my hand and I'm staring at those names and I got to fill in that bubble, like, and I've had last moment switches where I went in thinking I'm picking so-and-so. And then when it came down to filling out the bubble, I've gone a completely different way because I just vibed something different in that moment. And that's the way I vote. So, people could think that's crazy, but that's how I do.
Well,
but it's never really mattered.
Are you a procrastinator? Because that would seem to go with procrastination. Like I'm not a procrastinator. I always like to, I hit my deadlines early. I file my taxes early.
Oh, well, work stuff.
And
I'm
know
always deadline.
long before I go into the voting booth who I'm going to vote for.
Apart from work,
I just
yes, outside of work, I've never missed a deadline ever. Like legitimately in almost 20 years of doing media, I've never ever missed a deadline. However, everything else in my life is kind of like, I'll get to it as soon as I can. I'll get to it as soon as everything's piled on my plate. So yes, in a way, yes. So maybe if that's consistent with the rest of my personality, it's like, for the same reason I didn't get married until I was almost 40. Almost 40, Ted.
Before we go, Manila, because we've run really long.
I gotta go vote.
Who is going to win the presidency?
Predictions I can do at this week. I look, this week I had thought Donald Trump by the tip of his ear, but today I'm sensing a Harris win. Okay,
I'm sensing a Trump win. I'm not at all confident in that. That could 100%.
Oh, I'm not either.
I'm like, it's a coin flip. Totally, who knows? But
yeah,
that's where
I really don't know
where it goes. I think for me the metrics are people feel that the country's headed in the wrong direction. People are very unhappy with the state of the economy, whether they ought to be or not. They are unhappy about it. Those things normally predict a loss for the incumbent. She's the incumbent. Also, I don't think she has unified her party. So I think that's what we'll see.
So I literally don't know. I have no confidence in what I'm saying. I'm just vibing that I think women, old and young, are going to push Harris to the finish line. I think that's what's going to happen.
Could be.
But just
could be.
Even with the Electoral College, I think it'll eke her a tiny, slim victory. But I think it'll be her. That's what I woke up feeling this morning. But no confidence in that. Don't
all right, we will see.
Guys, we'll see tomorrow. We'll have a great panel. We'll have a great panel to discuss tomorrow. So thank you to Putinbot Gaming for supporting and moderating the chat, keeping the spammers out of there. Please go check out that gaming channel. And don't forget to subscribe.
Vintage Lefty, thank you for being a paid supporter on Rumble.
Oh, thank you. A new supporter, Vintage Lefty. Thank you. Well, I wish we had more Vintage Lefties, Ted. I think
I'm kind of a vintage lefty. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm kind of there too. So I'm with you. That's a good handle, Vintage Lefty. So thank you, Vintage Lefty, for supporting. And for all of you, if you are able to, please hit that subscribe button. If you're on Rumble, right below the chat line, you'll be able to click subscribe and become a $5 monthly subscriber to us to help us keep this going. We ask that you do become a paid subscriber so we can keep doing the show, because we're trying to make this our job after we got laid off. Thanks, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. So if you're enjoying what you see and you find value in our work, then please help us continue doing that. We are fully independent. We do rely on subscribers to help us not starve and become homeless. So please click on that subscribe button. At least share. Sharing is free. You can help support us that way. A lot of ways to support. So with that, we will bid you adieu. Go vote if you haven't.
No, it's not adieu. Adieu is permanent.
No?
Adieu is farewell. We're saying au revoir. Or better yet, adieu.
Really? Adieu is... Oh, I never
adieu
knew
is
that.
Literally like we shall never pass across again. It means to God, literally. Adieu. Dieu. French. So adieu means like to God. In other words, like it's up to God whether, but probably not.
Oh, wow. Kind of like, okay, bon voyage. Have a good one. In this case, we'll see you guys tomorrow.
Bon voyage. Bon voyage is like, unless you're on Alaska Air, you are going to see each other again. Yeah.
God. That's why I just say hasta mañana, folks. We're just, I'm from California. Everybody's Mexican. Like, hasta mañana. I'll see you tomorrow. We'll talk about whatever happens today. I don't know that we'll have an answer tomorrow, but we're at least going to try to dissect it and talk about it tomorrow morning as much as we can possibly know. So thank you guys for being here. Godspeed, America. We are sure as hell going to need it.
No doubt.
Speed. I mean, there's nothing else to say. We'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye.
We will. See you then. Bye, Manila. Bye.